everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Out of the Office. And I am delighted to be joined by Dimitra. Dimitra, come and say hello, introduce yourself, and tell us all about what you do.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here, Sarah. Thank you so much for the invite. Very excited for our conversation. For everyone who is joining as well, my name is Dimitra, as mentioned, and I'm currently working as a consultant for doing work around different organizations when it comes to HR matters or marketing matters. Originally from Greece, went to Canada for many years. Now I split my time between both countries that I get to call home, thankfully. Love to work with individuals from all over the world and help out however I can.
And I was like, this is the type of person I want on the show. That's like
Uh,
it's really hard to find people that love the show and also do this work as well. I mean, I'm sure there's loads, and hopefully I discover a lot more through this podcast. But yeah, whenever I spot people, I'm like, yes, more friends I can talk about the office with.
it's the best of both worlds, and I think it's so funny because people that love The Office that are in HR, it seems as a little bit of a odd thing because it's you know that what Michael Scott is doing is so wrong, and you know that would like you would be writing up violations, all day every day, but you can't help but laugh. So it's so interesting. I love what you're doing with this podcast. It's such a cool concept, and again, so happy to be here.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to have you here. And I think we're going to be talking about I mean, I'm really excited to talk about this topic because I feel like a lot of people relate to it either personally or professionally. I think there's so many layers to this subject matter, which I think it will resonate and connect with a lot of people. So, for context, we're back at the first season of The Office, and it's episode 6, and the title of this episode is actually called Hot Girl. So I think that kind of tells you what we'll probably expect in the episode itself. But we're going to watch a short clip, and then chat back and forth about what we think about what's happened.
Go ahead.
There's a person here who wants to sell handbags.
No vendors in the office. That is a distraction.
Okay, I told her you talked to her at
Pam,
least.
come on, I'm busy. So just tell her to go away.
Okay.
All right, I'll talk to her.
This one is hand in
All right, girls, bring it up. You're being infiltrated. In the hen house.
Cox in the hen house.
Don't say Cox. Oh, what is your name, ma fair lass?
Katie.
Ah, Katie. Wow, look at you. You're like the new and improved Pam. Pam 6.0. Oh, look. Oh, hey, no catfights, you two.
Yeah, I mean, that particular scene, I think just goes to show what can happen in the workplace or even just in general, situations with colleagues or friends or people that we know where someone is almost like taken aback by someone who is clearly quite beautiful. And then they let like typical rules just like fall by the wayside because they're like, ah, you're pretty. I'll let it go. Like you can do your thing. So yeah, I just wondered what your reflections are from that particular clip from that episode.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, at first, it's again, I think anyone that hasn't seen the show for sure, it's very off putting, right? Like, especially if you do have more of a lens of someone that is in human resources or even from a psychology background that can understand matters such as objectification, right? And how that can impact those around you. It's seen as shocking, right? And you kind of see it and you cringe and you go, oh my gosh. People that have watched the show, unfortunately, have a better understanding that that's who he is. He's inappropriate. He'll, say whatever is on his mind without really being mindful of the consequences or even what he's saying. But I think, yeah, we see it immediately, right? It's the whole, again, judging a book by its cover, as they say, which you're not supposed to do. And yet, subconsciously, right? I think everyone to a certain point does that. Initially, you see him telling Pam, like dismissing her, and he's even the way he treats her, right? That he's very much like, okay, you're wasting my time. I can't talk about this. And then he looks up, sees Katie, right, the other actress, and all of a sudden it's like, yeah, I think I can do it. But just so many of the comments he makes, like immediately he's like, break it up, ladies, right? Just the things are like, can't clean the house or whatever he said. And then, but when Dwight says it, then I was like, no one cares. So it's interesting to see how Michael like not only objectifies Katie, but then he tries to make himself as seen as like the leader and like the person in charge and the person that's important and even the person in power, right? Because he says like, I'll give you the conference room all day. And then when Pam says, well, there's an HR meeting, he's like, nope, like, and then he's like, decisiveness, right? To kind of show that he's authoritative and he has power and he makes decisions, and whatever she wants, basically he'll give to her. And it's clearly because of her looks. Yeah, very shocking at first. A little bit quite funny if you've seen it, because cringy, because that's what he's like. But that's kind of the initial reaction I have when I see that scene.
Yeah, it is so cringy, and also you're cringing because, well, one, the way that he's approaching it, he feels like he's almost overconfident with what he's saying. He feels like he's really winning with her, and he's like, "Right, I've got an in here, she's gonna respect me, she's gonna love me, she's gonna think I'm the best person in the office." And you can just see, like, those small, like, this is why I think the people that act in this show are so good, because it's not always like these really grand gestures. It's those small moments of someone's face just, like, changing slightly, and you just know that someone is incredibly uncomfortable. And yeah, it's really interesting in that particular scene where, um, you see her like, almost like the physical discomfort from, these 2 men just coming over and saying, "Oh, we don't normally let this happen, but, let's go and you can sell your handbags here, it's fine."
Exactly. When I think it's also to your point as well about body language, right? Like you can see Pam is kind of used to kind of curling up a bit. That's also her character, especially early on in the seasons. But we see it in this episode as well when Michael's like shooing her away, and then with Katie, you can tell that she's also uncomfortable, even though maybe it's not as obvious. But like you said, it's like those micro gestures that give that off. And if you're not good at reading body language, which clearly Michael is not, or Dwight, quite frankly, because he's also there, they're not going to catch on that, right? Like they're not going to get it. They're just going to think, oh yeah, like I'm, like you said, I'm winning.
Mm. I think, I wanna pick your brain a little bit, because obviously I
Yeah.
feel like you've lived in so many different places, obviously Canada and Greece, and obviously working with different, European countries and individuals. And I feel like before we started the podcast, you were talking a little bit about the differences in terms of, you know, beauty ideals. Because obviously in this particular clip, Amy Adams, the actress, like, she is very beautiful. Like, don't get me wrong, she's very easy to look at. She's very beautiful, stunning. But in terms of what we see as stunning and beautiful can change depending on where you are, and different cultural standards, beauty ideals, and different things of that nature. And maybe, in some situations, she might not actually get through to the boardroom and be able to sell a handbag. So she might not be seen as conventionally attractive to some cultures. But here, obviously, in America, she is. And so I wonder, like, in terms of, your experience in different countries, like, have you seen beauty ideals change, and how attractiveness is, maybe it differs across borders?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's a great question. It's definitely something that is so glaringly obvious that sometimes I cringe in like my everyday, because I notice things that, and again, like to everybody, discrimination can mean different things. And I think that, for me, I do pride myself as being someone that does champion, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And if I do a speech, I'll do my best to make sure that that's what I'm talking about, or a podcast, or whatever the case may be. And I've come to realize too that when we talk about discrimination, I think in Canada or the States, because they are quite similar in a lot of ways, discrimination is more based a lot of times on race. And if people are newcomers to the country, right? So obviously, myself, I was born in Athens, Greece, moved to Canada. I faced my own type of racism because I wasn't, born in Canada. I wasn't fully Canadian. I'm half, so it was kind of, and people knew that, English was my second language. People knew I wasn't born there, so I've had to deal with that. And what's interesting is that coming here, I see a different kind of discrimination where it's not necessarily based on race, because as a country, Greece is not as diverse. Um, I think it's fair to say that Canada and the United States are extremely multicultural and very diverse, and it's wonderful because you are so exposed to so many different religions and people from different countries and languages and cultures. Like it's very fascinating. And here, we're predominantly, the majority of the individuals living here are Greek and tend to have a certain, say, similar look and feel, if you will. Discrimination tends to a lot of times be against things like appearance, like when it comes to, or even age, right? So there is definitely ageism that's very predominant when it comes to the workforce here. I hear even from other individuals I know that maybe they want to change jobs and they're in their 50s and they say, there's no way I can leave because no one's going to hire me. I'm over 50. Um, Whereas you wouldn't necessarily see that as much in North America, because I think that's where you would say, like, okay, we really value your experience, especially for a more potentially senior type of role where you would value that someone has, let's say, 20, 30 years of experience. But here, for some reason, it doesn't seem to be always the case. At least, these are obviously my opinion and my experience speaking to people. And then also on the subject of appearance, where there is definitely a stereotypical beauty standard where a female has to be, a certain weight and quite small and has to have a certain appearance about her. And it does certainly can vary from industry to industry, but especially in the service industry, it's very obvious that the individuals being hired for the roles have to look a certain way. And what we would, I think, um, stereotypically say is a beautiful person, right? It has a certain height. Even for men, right? Is it a taller man? Like that's immediately seen as more attractive. If the woman, does she have long flowy hair? Is she a certain size? Is she more petite? What does she wear and how does she dress herself? And things like that are very much, I think, more so focused here because I think also it's the thing to focus on or the thing that will differentiate people more so than, let's say, like race or religion, where you would see that typically in North America. So that's definitely been very interesting to witness, or even trying to guide organizations I work with here to understand that you have to open up the floor to everyone, right? And sure, there's circumstances, of course, I've had to learn, right, that you have to be very specific in what you look for, and I can respect that, right? It's a business is a business. They have their targets, sure. But at the same time, it goes back to fundamentally like giving people the opportunity. And that even goes for individuals that are maybe have some, lack a certain ability, let's say, or they maybe require certain assistance in the interview process and being able to provide that, which parentheses, I do feel we're lacking that in North America as well to provide equal opportunities, um, for all individuals, even neurodivergent individuals, and so on and so forth. So I think that's lacking globally, but it's been very interesting to see the differences here and then even other European countries where, again, the discrimination is not so much on the race as we would maybe more so think in North America, but it's more so on the appearance and the age as well, and even the gender, right? Like certain more, which again, it's a global phenomenon, right? But we know that organizations that do have more than 30% female representation are 39% more likely to outperform their competitors. And that's starting to catch on, right? So there's hope. But we're still quite a bit of ways away from that. So it's interesting to watch it unfold.
Oh, whoosh. I'm like, there's so much there you said. I'm like, there's so many like golden bits that I want to pick up on. I think the first one around ageism is so interesting because inherently when we think about beauty standards and beauty ideals, they're based on one type of person, right? And like when we think about ageism and how we have to avoid aging as much as possible, we have to look as youthful as possible, right? you know, when it comes to men and they age and they start to grow a few gray hairs and they start to look a bit older, no one sees them for the most part as like, less than. They're like, oh, they're aging like fine wine or, they're a silver fox. But when you look at women and they start to age, and they start to have gray hair and they're not dyeing it, whatever it is, and getting rid of any kind of signs that they might be a bit older than, I don't know, 50, 60 plus. It's like, oh, they've let themselves go. Look how much they've aged. Like they look so bad for their age. And there's so much more criticism and, um, heat on women to look as youthful as possible for as long as possible, where men don't have it to the same degree. And it was really interesting what you were saying about like the difference between North America and Europe in terms of age. And it just makes me think about like the president of the States. Like he is quite old, which there's, I'm not trying to be ageist, but in terms of the I guess the age average of, the politicians in the US, it's probably around the 60-year-old mark. Whereas maybe in other countries in Europe, maybe the average age would be a lot lower. And it's just really fascinating to see those differences in terms of the perception of age and ability to do a role. Whereas maybe in North America, people would see older people as like, you're wiser, you're able to fulfill a role. Whereas maybe in Europe, people are like, oh, well, you're getting on a bit, you should probably retire soon, and maybe we make space for younger people. I don't know if that's true, but it's just interesting to see that kind of ageist lens on it, particularly with gender. Um, and then you were talking about those beauty ideals and the differences in terms of maybe skin color playing a part for North America, and then in Europe it's about those specific maybe features that someone might have. And it made me think about bringing in the lens of Asia and things like that. Like my heritage is Indian, and my family members kind of lived and were born in Malaysia. So we have Indian heritage, but we don't have that much connection to it. But still, there's such rife colorism in India, where the lighter your skin, the more favorable you are seen. And I think both in like India, but also in Southeast Asian countries like, Korea and China and places like that, um, the skin bleaching cream industry is extraordinary in terms of the wealth that they generate. Like, there is such huge income that those companies receive from people just using bleaching cream. I remember when I was a child that we had Fair and Lovely, which is a very popular brand in India that some people may or may not have heard of. And on the back, I don't know if you've seen, like, when you get toothpaste and you have like really yellow teeth and then it goes to white, and then you like measure it against your teeth and you're like, okay, where am I on the
Yes.
scale today? They had that for skin color on the back of these Fair and Lovely creams. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So literally,
Wow, I did not that's the first time I'm hearing of this. Wow.
yeah.
Oh
And
my.
my grandma had this Fair and Lovely cream in the house, and I would use this as a child.
Oh,
And I remember being shown that, like, you need to like lighten your skin, and it wasn't even almost like in it pushed as like a bleaching cream. It was almost like, the fairer you are, the more beautiful you are, and the cleaner you are as well. There was almost like that unhinged
appreciation, yeah.
viewpoint around,
Mhm,
like, the darker you are, the dirtier you are, which is horrific.
mhm.
And as a child, I was just
It
like, "Okay,
is, it's
grandma, give me this
yeah.
cream. It's fine, whatever." But obviously, as an adult, I was like, how toxic is it that I was raised on that? And then, that colorism is
Mm,
rife. So when we think about beauty and beauty ideals and any bias we have towards, why someone may be beautiful or not, I do think if we unpack it and look a bit deeper, a lot of the times it stems from racism, it stems from colorism, it stems from, we center European appearances as the ideal, and that's what we should strive for.
yeah,
Because you see, plastic surgery for, certain differences in your features to be try to make it closer as possible to more Eurocentric kind of features, which
yeah,
is such a shame. And then you see the flip of, like, people that are white and have typically European features having plastic surgery to then almost make themselves ethnically ambiguous, and just like it's almost
mhm,
like they are white and they are European, but they're trying to adopt things and like almost appropriate a feature or an appearance type that people that own that and have that are often bullied and seen as less than for looking and being that way. So just as you were talking, that's what came up for me, and I just, yeah, found it really really interesting that yeah,
mhm.
the differences between different cultures and countries in terms of those ideals.
Absolutely, and I mean, first of all, like, I'm quite honestly trying to not to get emotional with the story you just shared because I find with the cream, because I just for me, like, I can't even imagine having to deal with it. Like for me, I knew I was different when I went to Canada because obviously I spoke Greek, right? So um and I went at a young age. So having the language variation, having to try to make friends and trying to fit in and having to go to ESL or English as second language classes and things like that before, fully submerging in the system at a young age. I know how much that impacted me, and it's still even having to deal with racist comments as an adult, even in the workplace. some horrific things I've heard that I never would have thought I would hear, because I didn't grow up in that kind of environment. So maybe it does impact that. My mom was born in Canada, so she grew up in a very, like, my grandparents were Greek, migrated to Canada, built businesses, and lived that dream, so to say, which was incredible. But they raised their kids there, and then they came to Greece, and maybe that's what kind of helped shape my understanding of, like, we're all the same and we're all equal, and that's what kind of helped me even growing up here, where I didn't see that much multiculturalism, but just hearing the stories. But then going to Canada and then actually understanding that you're different, right? Or feeling like you're different. And even now coming back here, sometimes I still struggle with that, right? And it's one of those things where people here might say, like, oh, why did you move back, and like, why didn't you stay in Canada, or just comments that people will make, or even trying to navigate the workforce here and understanding or seeing some of the differences in the mentality and how things are approached. And I find that sometimes to be a little bit disheartening, because sometimes here I feel like I don't fit in. I'm like, what's happening? I can't even imagine just growing up and having those beliefs instilled in you that you have to look different, and that obviously in different cultures, you mentioned as well some Asian cultures where we know skincare is huge, and like SPF and like protecting the skin and using umbrellas or gloves or never let your skin darken. And then yet you have in other groups of people that are trying to tan, right? And they're trying to get body modifications to usually enhance certain features of their body to look like someone else. And it's very interesting to see how all those dynamics kind of play out, and understand the differences. It's almost like you want what you can't have, which is such a, like, psychological, right? I'm going a bit deeper here, but it's one of those things where it's like, oh, I want to have this, so how can I get it, or what can I do to make it happen? But you're right, a lot of the beauty standards are based a lot on kind of more, either more Eurocentric, as you mentioned as well, right? And seeing how those tend to prevail, even when you look at things like the modeling industry, right? I mean, sure, strides have been made to help to include more individuals that have, either it could be individuals that maybe have prosthetics, it could be individuals that are of a larger body, it could be individuals that don't have the stereotypical, light skin, light eyes, light hair type of features, and seeing those coming into the scene more and more so over the past years. But there's still such a long way to go, and we see that in the workplace, right? Like, I feel that as soon as you see a woman that's very attractive, the other kind of discrimination that I've witnessed occur as well is that people will say, like, well, how did she get that job? It's because of her looks. Whereas for a man, you wouldn't say that, and yet then they face their own discrimination too, right? We talked about the height thing briefly before, where it's like men, and these are lots of statistics on this, where men that tend to be 6 feet or 180 centimeters or taller, they tend to have more leadership positions than men that are shorter than that. Um, but no one's gonna question a man how he got to his role. They're gonna say because he has a good degree, because he worked really hard and whatnot. But as soon as you see a female that presents in a way that maybe has either dresses a little bit more, maybe not eccentrically, but dresses a little bit with like brand names, or has a certain way about her, is more stereotypically beautiful. For some reason, it's the association that, oh yeah, she, usually it's implication that there's something going on that's inappropriate in the workplace, and that's why they got the role, if you get what I'm saying, right? Whereas you don't necessarily see that for men, and there's a, for sure, it's so different how we objectify the different genders, and understanding what does that mean in the workplace, and how does it play out in different roles, from like junior to more senior roles, throughout the organization.
Yeah, I feel like there's so much to be said about how uh, people's features, appearances, attractiveness level, how much they meet a beauty ideal influences their performance or progress within an organization, even just in hiring and recruitment, right? And it's that idea of that halo effect of, if you meet somebody that's beautiful, we inherently connect that with like, oh, you look good, so you must therefore be good, right? And so when we see someone that is maybe we perceive as beautiful, we're like, well, we immediately associate them as someone that probably is loyal, is trustworthy, is valuable. It's all of those like positive things. It's like that positive association. We don't actually measure them based on their ability to fulfill a role. We just have those unconscious biases where we're like, okay, they're good. And that's why when you look at like people that are like celebrities and people like they're so beautiful, people immediately are like, oh, they must be such a nice person. It's like, you don't know this person whatsoever. You've just seen them in a movie, in a magazine, on social media, and because they look good, we inherently associate that with, oh, they must also be a good person, when actually that might not even be true, and for the most part, probably isn't. So this is really interesting.
When you know what's interesting about that too is that I noticed it from like early on, even when it came to the recruiting practices, right? Where a lot of times typically it was like, yeah, let's do an interview face to face. And immediately you can't help but judge the other person, right? Like it's hardwired within us, where I think that you need to actually do a lot of work to get out of that mindset of saying, okay, I'm not going to judge this person because of what they're wearing or what they look like, or how they walk or how they talk, or whatever their hair color is, type of thing. um, One thing that I've noticed, and like I think that has helped a little bit with kind of being more open to remote work, is having the ability to do a lot of more remote type interviews. So for me, one thing that I've implemented for years now in organizations that I've worked for is first interview is always a telephone interview, just right off the bat. Like first interview is a telephone interview. Yes, I can see the name, and like there's things that of course can have a little bit of bias in that, but personally it's about, okay, you can't see the other person, you're asking them questions to understand if they're going to be a good fit for the company, right? You're understanding a little bit more about their technical background or whatever they've worked on in the past to see if they are a good match for the role, and then you can move into a video interview, right? Or a face to face interview. Give people the opportunity to also just ease into things and ease into the conversation or the interview just on a phone, like based on the voice alone, and then kind of move into the visual aspect as well. And like I have found that that has helped a lot, even with other hiring managers that I've worked with, to just take away that visual component and really focus on what is the person actually saying to me, right? Because all you can do is focus on their voice, right? There's no visual. So it's like, okay, what are they actually saying? And what's their experience like? And are they a good fit for the company? And why do they want to work here? And put those kind of more at the forefront, and then move into getting to know. Because I mean, to be fair, it is the visual aspect can be important when it comes to interviews and selecting candidates, because body language I think plays a big role as well, right? Like if you have someone across from you that you're interviewing and they're maybe rolling their eyes, or they're staring into space, or they're really shut off, then that also does give you some nonverbal cues that, hey, maybe this person is not really interested in this role, and maybe we're wasting our time, right? Or if they are more eager, or they can appear more genuinely interested, or they're smiling, or they're nodding, or they can show you that they're actively listening. And that's what you're looking for in your organization. It's great to be able to see that as well. But I think one thing that I always like pride myself on is like making sure whatever you can do to take away as much information about the person's appearance as you can from the beginning, and just genuinely assess them, as you said too, on their actual ability and their desire to join the organization, right? To make sure it's a good fit for all sides. It's not just about, is this candidate right for us? It's, are we a good organization for this candidate, right? At least that's my belief, and being able to have a more kind of well-rounded approach to talent management and acquisition, and ensure you have people sticking around and that they're going to add value to your organizational culture regardless of their background, where they're from, what other languages they speak, what religion they are, and all of those things as well.
Yeah, when you were talking, it made me remember in previous roles when we would hire. I remember the managers and the leaders immediately, because the name's at the top of the CV, putting it into Facebook, putting it into Instagram, putting it into LinkedIn. And obviously you get an insight into maybe, their picture and who they are. And we make judgments, we make judgments within the first 7 seconds. That's how we form our first impression. And in those 7 seconds, how valuable is that insight to know if someone's going to be, a cultural add to the company or not? You have no idea. You can't judge anyone based on that. And I remember, when I would join like sessions to be like, how do you build your workplace profile and like personal branding and all this kind of stuff. And it was like, make all your like social media profiles private, which I still do. And I think that's still valid as a thing to practice. But it's just so twisted because the reason we're having to do that is because employers are checking those, maybe seeing that we've been on a beach drinking a margarita, or maybe we like skateboarding, or maybe we like, I don't know, doing parkour. I don't know, but those things mean that someone's seeing that and then immediately making a judgment about that person. And appearance will come into play with that, right? So, in that particular scene that someone's trying to sell those handbags, if they'd just emailed, they probably would have just got a blanket no. But because they were physically there and they were seen as attractive and someone wanted to be in that in that environment with them, they were able to kind of like start selling the handbags, which, everyone's got to run a business. And if that's what worked for that character, then fair play. Like if she managed to sell some handbags, fantastic. But it shouldn't be based on that, right? It should be based on, do people in the workplace need some handbags? Does this make
Exactly.
sense corporate wise in terms of the
Yeah.
way people are spending their time?
Which it doesn't. Right? I'm sorry. Why would you go to a paper selling company that has, I mean, they're pretty evenly split, to give them credit in terms of kind of the personnel there. But, it just, to me, it seems so random. Like, I can't even imagine being in any of my workplaces in the past and having somebody kind of come in and be like, would you like to buy handbags? Right? Like, I think it was so out there. And one of the things, now that you were talking, it kind of triggered my memory to remember when Michael says that you're like the Pam 6.0. He's like, you're a better version of Pam 6.0, which is just, again, like such a, you're objectifying the one woman. You're causing the other woman to feel terrible about herself because you've just compared her to somebody else. And I think that's something that definitely happens in the workplace. And a lot of times I think that females in an organization can't be more pitted against each other based on who has the best looks or who has the like better handbag, or this wearing, has the nicest hairstyle, or whatever the case may be. Whereas with men, it's like, okay, you're all wearing, whatever, polo and jeans, or maybe you're wearing a suit to work, depends what you do, or maybe you're in construction gear, whatever your business attire is. It's not, no one is looking at, okay, well, what kind of brand are you wearing, right? I think, sure, in the more executive levels in big organizations, of course, even for men, there can be emphasis like, are you wearing a tailored suit, right? If it's a corporate type of role. And is it, do you have a $500 haircut? Yes, that happens as well. But I think that happens at a much higher level than it does for women. For women, it's like right from the beginning, like, what do your nails look like? And what are you wearing? And what perfume are you wearing? And, things like that, that I think, again, it kind of goes to show the whole notion of where Michael says, like, Pam 6.0. Like, it's not even Pam 2.0, right? Like, I really want to emphasize that as well. It's not 2.0, it's 6.0, which is just, for somebody here, like, what a terrible, awful thing to have someone say that to you. And it's your boss, which then who are you going to complain to, right? Like, sure, you can go to HR, but that's not always that easy to handle as well. And obviously, in the case of the office, we know that that would never fly, right? Which is, it's sad, because I think that is actually an accurate representation of a significant number of workplaces where you can't go to HR to complain about your boss, because you might not necessarily win. And not to discourage people from doing that, it's just that you have to have all your facts, and you need to be very prepared to go make any sort of accusation, um, because you never know if it's going to backfire, right? And it's, sure, there's power in numbers, and there's power in having evidence to be able to back up what you're saying. But even that, it shouldn't be that hard necessarily, right? You should have to build a whole case study of, this person said this to me in the workplace, and let me, say that it's inappropriate. We shouldn't have to have put that much effort into it, and yet that's a reality, right? But I did find that comment, yeah, for sure, quite disturbing as well, to be honest. And you can see Pam just withering away, right? As I think anyone would if they heard that.
I think that's such a valid point around the power dynamic because it actually makes me remember this moment in a previous workplace where we were going to pitch to a potential new client, and I worked in PR. So, PR is very much about the way that you present yourself, and, you want to set yourself up in a particular way. And I've always enjoyed wearing makeup. I wear makeup all the time. And I think on this particular day, I was also wearing makeup. And we were all talking about the things that we're going to wear. So, like, just chatting about that kind of stuff. And I think there's something to be said about, you know, wearing something that makes you feel confident and comfortable rather than wearing something that somebody else tells you should be what you're wearing. Because then I feel like that kind of translates into actually then how you perform. Because if your clothes are uncomfortable and they're not fitting you the way that you normally like, it will translate into maybe a poor performance for the most part. Maybe some people can get by that, but not me. And I remember this particular manager saying to me, You're going to wear makeup tomorrow, aren't you?" In like a very serious way. And I remember because I was so young at the time, not really questioning it or saying it. I was like, yeah, yeah, of course. Like, yeah, of course I'm going to wear makeup. But obviously, when you come out of that situation, you're like, how messed up is it that, be able to be taken on this really cool opportunity to pitch a new client and pitch a new opportunity. There's certain things that are expected of me physically that don't actually show anything about my ability to do a job. It's like, and also if I wore too much makeup, then maybe if I wore too much makeup, maybe there would be a critique, right? So as women and as even men now as well, there's that fine balance, right? It's like, you've got to look put together, but not so put together that you're like arrogant and up yourself and so overly like loving your own identity and how you present. And then it's like, well, don't let yourself look too far gone that you look like you've let yourself go and that you don't care about the way that you look and don't look disheveled. And then it's just, yeah, it's a really, really tricky place. And I think just a point around that PAM 6.0, it's always about not about you as an individual and what you feel and what you want to do. It's about how do you compare to your peers? How do you compare to this person? How do you compare to that person? And I think it's such a challenging way to be because social media feeds into that. We're constantly scrolling and comparing ourselves. And, I think that feeds into pushing ourselves into these beauty ideals, as we said, that are inherently racist, they're inherently sizist, they're inherently ableist as well. And there's so many aspects of it that we're trying to fit a box that none of us are going to fit in, because it was only made by probably like, colonialists and, that kind of stuff. So it's really difficult to see. And we see that then translate into the workplace and into who gets hired, who gets promoted, who gets opportunities. And it's really disappointing to see that continue in today's society.
For sure. And I think one of those things is that, as you mentioned too about social media, I know we had briefly touched on this as well. And I told you, I find this so fascinating, right? It was the whole, where there's that sound bite that's, kind of, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I could be not fully getting the words right, but it goes on the lines of like, I'm looking for a man in finance, trust fund, 6'5", blue eyes. And it's so interesting to me because, again, it's that whole notion of, historically the objectification has been more toward women, right? I think that's, hopefully people can all agree on that. I think there's a lot of evidence to prove that. um but it's interesting, you hear a song like that, or a TikTok you see on something like that, where all of a sudden it's like, at first you hear like, oh, catchy beat, and like, yeah, like looking for a man in finance with a trust fund and 6'5" and blue eyes, whatever, right? And it's interesting because now it's like, wait, so it's a woman objectifying men. And it's so interesting to me, again, from my lens. I mean, maybe your average person could care less and they're like, I love this song and yeah, I want a man in finance, whatever, right? But like from my perspective, it's more like, whoa, wait a second, like this actually sounds really bad because, so if he doesn't have a trust fund, like, okay, I mean the finance part, whatever, right? Work is work, but like the trust fund I find interesting. Then the whole 6'5", I mean, how many men are actually 6'5", right? Which that's like, I don't even know, like two and at least 2 meters 2.5 meters probably tall, right? I'm sure half the NBA. Yes, you can get those people for sure. That's kind of your best bet. But then also like the blue eyes, which again, going back to like the Eurocentric features, right? So you're looking for someone that's tall, that historically has not been at that height level, is not historically found in people that are, white or more Eurocentric, right? Where, or from a European background. And then but then the blue eyes is. So I think it goes back to what we're talking about, like trying to check all these boxes, but like it doesn't always add up. Like it's really hard to find that combination, right? Forget it. I mean, I'm not even gonna start with that's one thing, because like that's a whole other thing issue, right? But like just from the appearance alone, I just thought that was so fascinating, and I know I told you I wanted to briefly just chat about, because it's so timely. Like it's happening now, and it's, people all over the world are like singing this song literally at clubs.
Mm. Yeah, I think it's this hype bias is huge, and it's something that's existed for not even just in recent years. It's existed for centuries, and it's well known that the taller a man is, the more opportunities they're rewarded in life. There's a privilege that comes with being that much taller. But unfortunately, on average, men that are taller, over 6 foot, actually live shorter lives because I guess their heart is doing more work. So it's actually really sad when you think about all these tall people. Um, but it's interesting because I remember a family member saying to me the other day that they'd got into a relationship with someone, and they almost like kind of pulled me aside and were like, just so you know, they're like 5'5". And I was like, I don't know why
Okay.
that's relevant, but thanks for the warning. Like I was like, I
Come
don't know what you
on.
like I don't know what's gonna happen. Like if I didn't know that, I wasn't gonna be like, oh my goodness, wow, someone that is under 6 foot and they're
Oh
a
my
man.
gosh.
Um,
Yeah.
and it's really interesting. And I think also like when we think of social media and dating apps, I often hear people saying that they really want to find a man who is 6 foot plus. And you hear stories of men adding inches onto their height on these apps. And when they meet
Yes.
in real life,
Absolutely.
they're actually catfishing in some respect in their height. And that's
Yeah.
one is not great to lie, but two, the feeling of having to lie about your height feels
Mhm.
so wrong
It's
to me.
sad.
And, like, it's really
Yeah.
sad, and we're putting so much pressure on people that, you're not worthy unless you're over 6 foot. It's bizarre
Yeah.
to me. Yeah.
It is for sure. When that's the thing, I think, where it's also, people in leadership or men in leadership positions are typically, yeah, over 6 feet, right? Over 180. So it's so interesting to see how that plays into that as well. And I find that again, like going back to kind of earlier in the conversation, where the objectification that occurs, it occurs for both men and women. But I think, and I don't even get me started into beyond that. I think, for the sake of the little time we have together left, but it's one of those things where for individuals that, you're either going to be, if you're a man, you have to be a certain height. If you're a woman, you have to be a certain size. And it's just so interesting to see, again, the objectification that exists and just the stereotypes that exist with that and what does it mean. And yeah, it can be very, I think, detrimental to people's mental health when they don't live up to whatever this stereotype has to be. And that's where it's the job of other people, hopefully people like us, where we can go and say like, no, we shouldn't be judging people based on their appearance alone, whether it's because of their race or the color of their skin or their hair or their eyes or their height or their size, whatever the case may be. I didn't mean to make that into a rhyme, by the way. I just heard it back as I said it. I'll make my own TikTok clip. No, I'm just kidding. But it's one of those things where it shouldn't be happening. And I think that the more that people in position of power or position in, when I mean power, I mean even with people in that are hiring managers or HR managers, like when it comes to the workplace, like it has to start from those individuals getting really the proper training to understand, like there's so many biases in recruiting. Get rid of them, but you have to train people on understanding what those biases are and understanding how to overcome them, right? Like it has to come from a place of knowledge and understanding and training, because I think a lot of people are genuinely ignorant and I mean that in a positive way, right? Like they just don't know, or they don't realize it, right? Like there's subconscious biases we don't even know are happening when they're happening. But I think people that can and are in a position to impact change, I think that we owe it to other people to make that change, right? And do something about it and educate those around us. And if you're in HR, educate your hiring managers to say, like, no, this is we're gonna do the interview process this way. We're gonna try to eliminate as much of the bias as we possibly can. And you need to focus on the script. Like even for me in the past, I've said these are the questions we're gonna ask, right? I mean, coming in agreement obviously and make sure everyone's on board with them. But it's more like don't stray from these questions. Like you need to have structured interviews. And yes, we can leave some room towards the end of the interview process for some more unstructured questions, but to make it fair for everyone and make sure everyone has the same exact opportunity, you need to have structured interviews. You need to have the same people involved. You need to have education provided and training for the hiring managers so that they can focus on the individual's ability and not just like their appearance, or are they going to be somebody I want to get drinks with after work on a Friday evening, right? Like that's not, to me, that's not okay. And I think it comes down to, like, again, whoever is in a position to make a change should genuinely consider trying to be part of a change for a more fair and equitable environment, especially in the workforce for all of us, right? Because I think we all deserve opportunities for work, right? And have be successful in whatever career we happen to choose, and not have that being withheld because we're not a certain height or a certain size or a skin color.
Mic drop moment. I feel like that is a beautiful place to, like, wrap up and just be like this, yeah, such a great takeaway for listeners in terms of how they then move on and think about kind of debiasing the recruitment and hiring and just how we treat people, right? You know, expecting people to fit into boxes that they shouldn't have to, and there's no real pressure for that. Um, but before we say bye to our listeners, something that I'm asking all my guests is obviously Michael Scott in the show has world's best boss mug that he gifted himself. And essentially, if you were to buy yourself a world's best something mug, what would yours say?
That's such a great question. I think that one of the things that I would like to think I'm good at is listening. So maybe I would say world's best listener. And I mean that when I mean about listening, I mean like being very empathetic and trying to really understand where people are coming from and take in different perspectives and educate myself. But to do that, you have to actually be able to listen to people and really kind of take their experiences in and try to see, okay, what is their world like? And then by listening to them, I think that's what then helps not only my education in terms of expanding my awareness of and what's going on around me and what other people experiences are like, but also then being able to then essentially share that with other people, right? Or have an opportunity such as, you know, this wonderful podcast where maybe I'm able to shed some light on experiences not just of my own but what other people are experiencing through, and hopefully that resonates with others. So I would like to think I'm a great listener. Hopefully people can agree. So we'll see, but I think that's the mug I would send. Yeah, so I usually live on LinkedIn. I would say that's kind of my kind of number one hub. So I do have a website as well, which is my name, DimitraDimitropoulou.com, that people can find me and reach out also. But even LinkedIn, again, Dimitra Dimitropoulou on LinkedIn, you'll kind of find me. This is my headshot typically that's on there. Pretty easy to find. But yeah, I kind of tend to stick on those, and would love always to connect with people, and always happy to, you know, wherever I can help out. I also do a lot of mentoring through various programs. ADP List is one of them. So people can find me on adplist.com as well for just offering some free advice. But yeah, those are kind of my main hubs: the website, LinkedIn, and ADP.
Long.
Yes.
But this has been truly wonderful, and I'm just so grateful for you coming on and talking and sharing your perspective because yeah, it's been a fascinating podcast and I really enjoyed myself, and I'm sure our listeners have had a good time as well. So yeah, just thank you, and yeah, thanks to our listeners for tuning in for another episode, and hopefully we'll see you in the next one. Thanks everyone.